Talk Radio, you're in to all things music.
So I just grew up with a very large access to a lot of different music, and a lot of musicians, used to come by and hang out, and it just seemed like a normal thing back then. I didn't realize until much later in life that it was kind of cool that we knew the Buck Owens family or Earl Travis or any number of these other people I could name. At the time, it was just, these are my dad's friends.
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Hello and welcome to Intersect Radio. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I haven't talked to you guys since last Tuesday. I wish I could talk to you more, but hopefully every Tuesday we have something really good to share with each other and really good to talk about. Today, it's going to be great. It's going to be a blast talking to Mr. Randy Layton. I'm sure you folks out there are familiar with Randy. He is probably best known to you as the man behind Alternative Records, the label that released several albums related to former Exit record acts Steve Scott, the 77s, and Robert Vaughn. He's also worked with several other contemporary Christian music artists not related to the Exit label, and he has spent most of his life involved in the arts. And today he's going to share with us stories of his faith and the music business and his experiences in attempting to get Christian music artists signed to a major record label and all those pitfalls. So it's going to be really good. So how are you, Randy, over there?
I'm doing okay, although I thought we were going to talk about fishing. So all of it is a shock. But
I thought about that, and I thought about that, and I thought against it. I said, well, no, fishing, no, that wouldn't fly. Get it? That wouldn't fly.
Anyway. Yeah.
So how you doing, Randy?
I'm doing okay. Just maintaining. A lot of things going on.
Yeah. Well, that's good. A lot of good things, I hope.
Yeah. I mean, there's some challenges, but life is a bit like that, but there's some good things as well.
Okay.
So
well, tell us. I want to start with just give us an overview of the things you have done in CCM.
Okay. Want to talk a little bit about how I got there?
Well, yeah. How did you get there?
Yeah. I didn't just arrive. So we can go over the conversion experience that I had, a bit later that kind of would have started that process. But prior to that, I did have a long background in music in terms of family upbringing and those kind of things, and we'll touch on that later as well. But once I went through that conversion experience and really understood what it was that I had been sort of following, prior to that growing up, it came pretty quickly together, the idea of fusing together my interest in the arts and in music with my faith. And this being, the late 70s, I quickly found that, at least in America, that was a bit wanting. I mean, there wasn't a lot of, there was obviously, from the early days of the Jesus movement, there was obviously a music thing happening. That was always kind of part of the movement. One of the tools used to evangelize, sort of thing. And there's some really good albums that came out of that, and some really good people. But I would compare that to things I was currently listening to that, didn't come out on Christian labels. And I would wonder why, we couldn't do better, or why the music couldn't be more challenging lyrically. I would look at, painting. I've had a long background also in studying painting, and wondering why there weren't more Christian artists in today's culture that were actively, involved in that field and letting their faith inform that. Obviously, back in the times of the Reformation and different art periods, that was happening, but somehow we kind of lost that path. Yeah. As far as CCM goes, very early on, I started to understand that there were people in other countries that were doing interesting things, and I wanted to get hold of that. So I just had this idea in November of 1979 to start a company that would import things from different countries in this zone, and then also at the same time I could export things that were not available over there from the U.S. labels as well. And concurrently, I was also putting on, Christian shows, putting on concerts. And, so in the early days, I worked with, on the Christian side, people from the second chapter of Acts, Petrus Servant, Keith Green, a number of people. And then in terms of what I was encountering overseas, I was just really intrigued early on by what was happening there, because they didn't seem to have the same hang-ups about some of these questions. As far back as the early 70s, very early 70s, you have people like Steve Scott, who I would later get to know, that was already, wandering barefoot at the Greenbelt Festival with a big beard and talking poetry. And along with guys like Steve Cooper. You had acts like Fishco as early as 75, and the Water, was it the Water into Bridge band? Can't recall. But a lot of acts were around, and by the mid-70s, were really pushing the boundaries of music and art and poetry, and they had a whole festival around that, Greenbelt, which we didn't have anything like that over here. So I quickly started to engage with a lot of people over on that side of the pond, and that in turn really began to influence what I wanted to do here on this side, the way that I wanted to approach those things. So
Cornerstone started after Greenbelt?
Pardon me?
Cornerstone came after Greenbelt?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. It did. I quit putting on shows because I began to realize that the kind of shows I was putting on, no matter what how strong my efforts were to bring in the unchurched into those environments. And I did have a rule of trying to hold shows at what I call independent venues. They wouldn't be at churches. They would be at the, like the fairgrounds or at some art school.
Or Wow Hall.
Or the Wow Hall, as you would later find out. Things like that. So even though I attempted that, I realized it was pretty much just the church rocking the church, So, so I became less interested in that, and I became a lot more interested in trying to find musicians who felt very strongly about, about being Christians, but by the same token, making really good music, or writing really good poetry, or those kind of things that would be thought-provoking, and that you could also play for people that were not quote unquote church that would get it. You know, they would like the music and you know, maybe the message would come to them you know, through that. You know, to give what I would call secular examples, I mean, I think U2 was able to do that from right from the go. The Alarm, you know, there were different things happening around the early 80s. But I had this thinking going on even prior to that. But I did know that there were acts in the UK, like After the Fire, which started their CBS contract in 1979 with a lot of the same ideas. You know, that this was really happening. I just wanted to see what I could do on this end. And so over a period of time, alternative records eventually, while I maintained the idea of doing, you know, mail order back and forth over the world, and which also did a lot to sort of formulate these different relationships, I did eventually want to move into becoming a record company. And that started just simply because I remember writing Jan Bolts of the Jan Eric Bolts to some of the 77s. The first album had come out, which was Ping Pong Over the Abyss, and I remember somebody playing that for me, telling me it's Christian punk. And I was listening to it, going, "Well, I've heard better.
It's not punk.
It's not really punk, and it's not really that great of a record." I wasn't that impressed. I'd heard better things from other places, but the next record, I'll Fall Down, had a rather interesting cover. Mike's on the ground, laying on the ground with a striped shirt on. It was very colorful. It had a whole different image, and I just went, "Well, that's pretty interesting. I'll pick that up." And I took it home, and I played it I played side one 3 times before I even flipped the record over. And I was really, really impressed by how far the writing had come, how far the production had come, all that. So I don't normally do this, but I just fired off a letter to Exit, which got Jan's attention. And it was basically, "Look, this is where I saw you. You've done these things. I'm very impressed. I'd like to know more about what you were doing." I already had an idea of what Exit was doing, because when I was in ministry, which is another story, in Redding, California, we were getting flyers from the warehouse that, you know, about scratch band shows and just other acts that were under that umbrella. So,
well, let me ask you something else. Let me ask you something else. You obviously have good taste in music. So,
well, yeah.
So how did that come about?
So
how did that come about?
Okay, we'll have to circle back. It was Papa Was a Rolling Stone. That changed my life. Actually, you know, as your audience probably knows, you played drums on that track. And the one thing I did want to tell you was, when that song came out, I tried to do all the parts. all the singing? The high part and the deep bass part and all that, because I had a voice that had a pretty big range, you know, but that falsetto always killed me, you know. But I loved doing it. Years later, when I found out you played drums on the track, I was just, you know, floored. But anyway, growing up, my father was a professional guitar player. He started playing professionally, I believe, about age 16 on his first records on a label called NGM with an artist named Sam Nichols. And he would continue to have that career, you know, for most of the rest of his life. His interests were jazz, country, you know, some pop stuff. I mean, certainly growing up, I was around everything from the Beatles to Django to, you know, the hits of the day, gospel music even. So, it was all there, and it was encouraged for me to go ahead and check out anything I wanted to. So, I remember my first record collection was a whole stack of records that were given to me when I was three years old. I never forgot it. It was a batch of records that were given by a local radio station guy that we knew. He just dropped them off. There were things that had either not gotten airplay or had dropped off their playlist. And so I just grew up with this kind of skewed idea of what people listen to, because a lot of what I listened to at home were not hits. They were just things that probably should have been hits, but, they weren't added. So I grew up with a lot of things that probably later became like, garage band, classics. But I was always interested also, in the music my dad was doing. And, my mom's side, it was picking up, Joey London and things like that. So I just grew up with a very large access to a lot of different music and a lot of musicians, some you've heard of and some you wouldn't, used to come by and hang out, and it just seemed like a normal thing back then. I didn't realize until much later in life that it was kind of cool that we knew the Buck Owens family or Earl Travis or any number of these other people I could name. At the time, it was just, these are my dad's friends. So
did you? I'm getting a visual. I'm getting a visual of all these guys coming over to your house and maybe setting up and playing in the living room or out in the yard or stuff like that.
Yeah, in the yard.
Did that happen?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we had a really nice backyard where we could set up. And in fact, the last house we were in, living in the San Luis Obispo area, there was a really nice addition built to the back of the house where there's equipment set up and people could just plug in, and it was great. And then I got to sneak in my huge Monkees poster on the wall, and while they played, and so it was it was great. I mean, a great education. I think I got the rock and roll snuck in the house because I could see the Ozzie and Harriet show and see Rick Nelson.
Yeah.
No, that was my introduction that way. And, they allowed the Monkees and they allowed the Beatles until John got really weird to them. But
well, hold on to that thought, Randy. We're going to have to take a break here for a commercial. Okay. Thanks, folks, for listening. We're going to be right back. We got to do right now what we got to do. And here's some commercials.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Hi, I'm Tim Dolbear, the host of Sound Experience on Intertalk Radio. Each week, I talk with top professional audio engineers, producers, musicians, and the manufacturers that make the tools that we use in the studio each and every day. From capturing the perfect take to mastering your final release, and the tools and how the pros use them, we are going to dive deep into their process and learn from their experience. I look forward to you joining us each week on Sound Experience with me, your host, Tim Dolbear.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
And we're back. Thanks for waiting with us. We're here with my guest, Mr. Randy Layton. And just before we went to commercial break, Randy, you were telling us about your dad and his friends and your exposure to music. And you had a record collection at 3 years old. That's pretty. Yeah. I mean, that was forth-telling.
I still have some of those. So, I mean, it wasn't like I wouldn't get children's records occasionally, but concurrently I would also get Chuck Berry, Almost Grown, or whatever, right? So it was all there. I think the difference between being 3 and being 23 is you get a better perspective on
right.
on what you were listening to back then. But from the very early age, also, I remember being really intrigued by sound. I was, how do these guys get that sound? Whether it's guitar tone, reverb, those kind of things. So my dad had a couple different reel-to-reel machines as far back as like 6 or 7 years old. I was already playing with my own reel-to-reel tape recorder, learning how to record things on one channel and flip it over and record on another, and do little sonic experiments. So I was just really, really intrigued by those kind of things. And the other thing I think I want to mention is that concurrently, my mom especially was very much the church-going person. So we were always going to the local church there, the Church of the Open Door, this tiny little place. And every Sunday we'd put on literally our Sunday best. We had these horrible, red vests with emblems on them as kids. I don't know. Terrible.
The family crest.
The family crest. You have to see photos. But I had a younger brother, about 5 years younger than I was, and then I had an older sister who was five years older. And so through my sister, I would really get a lot of the current things that were going on. So, if the new Tommy James record is out, I'm hearing it, that sort of thing. My younger brother was not all that aware at this point of much of anything because he would have been like, 4 or something when I was really diving into music. But, my mom had this oil painting of Jesus, one of these paint my numbers things that she did. And it just hung on the house for years. And I swear those eyes followed me wherever I went. So it's very creepy. but because of that, those kind of things, I mean, I always had a sense of God, and I always had a sense that there was, this God that that was looking after us and that wanted us to engage. And I tried to understand that the best as I could as a really young person. While engaging in all this other stuff. So there was always that sense, and I mentioned that just because it sort of sets up some later things, but it wasn't like by the time I'd really gone through my conversion process, I didn't already know a lot of the theology behind it. I was just choosing not to follow it for quite a while.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people do, but I think all those things helped in the early years. The exposure to church, the exposure to music, all that, and I read from a very early age on as well. So I just soaked up anything I could get my hands on, books and newspapers and what have you. So I was always just really aware from my age of what was going on. In the world. I mean, I remember, we lived in California. I remember RFK getting shot on live TV. I mean, those kind of things. It was just, I remember thinking the world was falling apart then. And, you'd get that if you were watching, Vietnam footage every night or people getting assassinated, Martin Luther, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all of that was very powerful and really weighed on me. So anyway, that's sort of my growing up thing. My parents did divorce when I was about 10, so I did not see my father again until I was about 17. So my stepfather was wonderful, and he's the guy that I didn't take up learning how to fish and those kind of things from. My dad would have been the guy who locked himself in the bathroom and kept us out because he wanted to hear the reverb in there. We had a lot of interesting experiences with them growing up. So,
But Dad, I gotta pee.
Oh yeah, that happened more than once. But I could see he was a very creative guy. I think what my mom found out when she married him, and she was really young when she did that. It was. He's a physician, and she'd already had worked at the Golden Nuggets and then seen him play there with his bands and that sort of thing. And there's this whole, stars in your eyes sort of element to it. And then I think later, when reality set in, musicians don't always have jobs. They're not always working.
Most of the time, they don't have jobs.
Most of the time, man. So you'd have, these follow periods where he'd be working side jobs, lugging around water bottles and, to offices back when those big glass ones and things, stuff like that. So it was pretty tense. By the end of that relationship, we moved to Vegas for a summer.
Was that the thing that you think caused the divorce?
What,
that pressure?
Music?
Yeah, the inconsistent lifestyle, feast or famine.
Sure. I think it was the inconsistent lifestyle and, perhaps some of the temptations of that lifestyle also figured into it without getting into a whole lot of detail. Which happened on both sides. So it was a little toxic, toward the end. The sad thing was that I was not allowed contact with him until I graduated, and then my mom finally said, well, if you want to touch base, here's his number. So we reconnected that summer, which incidentally was the summer that I got saved, and everything started kind of coming together really magically during that period in a lot of different ways.
So how did that come about? Your being saved.
So the last year of high school. Well, let me back up a little bit. So in the early 70s, my older sister was getting drug into Calvary Chapel and what was happening with the Jesus movement culture at that point in time. and I got drug along as well. And so I had very early exposure to some of the music of the era and some of the teachings and things that were going on of the era. I just remember there was a night where the gifts were being talked about, and one of them was, the gift of speaking in tongues, and they said, "Oh, everybody can have this." And I said, "Well, I don't think I need it." And, "Oh, no, you should." I'm like, "Don't think so." So we all went around, and he said, "I'm going to lay hands on you, and that's what you're going to have." And so I just felt this pressure, so I just made up stuff. And they were like, "Oh, hallelujah, he's got the gift." And I went, "Hey, I'm out of here." So I didn't go back. That was disappointing for me, that I could somehow not fool God, obviously, but I could fool these people.
Right.
So we spent the next 3 or 4 years just sort of exploring, various things that one could do, in terms of whether it be drugs, whether it be exploring alternative spiritual realms. I mean, I was really interested in the Maharishi and studied him for a little while, and things like that. But I would also volunteer at church camp at the Presbyterian Church. I was just kind of torn. And finally, these two guys showed up from the church about a half hour away. And they were living in a place called Crescent City, and I was living in Brookings, Oregon, which is a coastal town on the Oregon coast, right near the California border. In those days, one could actually show up at a high school, and go, "I want to do Bible study," and they would go, "Sounds great." So, they had that after school, and my girlfriend at the time wanted to go. We both thought we would kind of play the game, but sort of pretending we were further along with our journey than we were, and try to fool these guys. But we were quickly really drawn in by their personalities, by the message. Still, I wasn't convinced. And I remember right towards the end of my senior year, I had a nervous breakdown, which is a very traumatic experience. I had all these things built up, and I won't get into all of that because we're on a time schedule. But all these things that I come up with that were very painful growing up, I always kind of thought if I could just get past high school and then move where nobody knew me, I could kind of start over and it'd be great. But that didn't happen. I finally just kind of had this moment where I had to let everything go. And when that happened, it was like, it was miraculous. It was a cleansing. Immediately, I felt this tremendous weight lifted off of me. That wasn't the conversion experience, but it sure set it up, because with about 2 weeks later, I was over visiting these guys at their apartment, and staying there actually for a couple of days. And they were going to church that night, but they said, "Look, Randy, you've got to get serious. You've got to, you got to turn it over." And I was like, "I don't know, man. Just give me space." So they took off. I was really tired, so I fell asleep on the couch. And then I had this incredible dream. And without getting again into all the details, I just remember at some point in my best, Charlton Heston, Cecil B. DeMille kind of voice, I had seen this big curtain, huge curtain hanging there, and I knew that was separating me and God. And so I just commanded God, or really just asked him, "God, please tear down those rods." And immediately the rods came down, and I woke up really praising God, and that was it. I mean, I knew that was the moment I was saved, because there's no barrier now. It was all kind of laid bare, and I just went, Jesus, I get it. I'm going to follow you. And they came back, and I was glowing like, just ear to ear, and said, so what happened? Like, this happened. And then at the same time, my girlfriend was back in Brookings, half hour away, having the same experience, not the same dream, but the same coming to Jesus moment. So we both got together the next day, and like, man, you never got to happen to me. Well, me too. And it was, so it was a very, very powerful time. And so that was, and then I learned very quickly that faith is going to get challenged. I mean, it seems like from the word go, as soon as I said, I'm going to take this Christianity thing seriously, I get invited to a party where there was pot all around, all these different things. I remember like screwing up there and then coming back, and just, it was like almost every week there was some kind of challenge, and they just said, James 4:7, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. And I had to learn that. And I did, but it told me that something serious was going on, that as soon as I had that experience, it wasn't going to be a cakewalk. It was going to be very challenging. And that told me a lot about the validity of what I had just done, because there were those differences. So that's that story. And then when I before I left the area, I got involved in my first concerts, putting on with these guys, putting on Rez Band back before they had their first album out, and we managed not to tell all these fine old people at the church how loud they would actually be. So I remember a lot of people walking out with their hands over the ears, but this one, I remember this elderly lady walked by. She goes, God bless you, but I just can't take it anymore, But and Glenn Kaiser was probably the first intense Christian I ever met until I met Keith Green, who's probably topped it. And we did Dan Amos in Eureka, and and then I moved here. And that's where I started getting engaged, kind of circling back to where we first started. That's when I started, getting engaged in the arts from other parts of the world, and reading books. Art in the Bible by Schaeffer was a huge one. That came out in 1973, but, I got it in 1978, I think. And discovering guys like Steve Turner, who was a British writer and poet, with books like Tonight We Will Make Love and Up to Date, which is a book of poems. Gosh, what else? Hans Rookmacher was a big one for me as well. He had books like Modern Art and Death of a Culture, Art Needs No Justification, and there's I love Flannery O'Connor, and then there's this book called Mystery and Manners, which was really interesting in that she really refused to kind of validate the idea that quote-unquote Christian art would focus on just Christian subject matter, or just
we're gonna have to take a break right there, Andy. Sorry. Man, that's interesting stuff. We'll be back, folks. You guys are doing another commercial.
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear, host of Sound Experience here on Intertalk Radio. And Source Connect by Source Element is the essential tool that we use to link between my studio in Austin, Texas, and the WS radio station in San Diego. Now, with Source Connect, not only can we communicate in real time and with HD audio, but it's synced up and is of a high enough quality that I can use it for real-time ADR work, remote recording, and overdubbing, and it even allows me to remotely control a DAW. Source Connect by Source Element. Affordable, high-quality audio and video connection over the internet for all of your production needs.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Make this your vinyl night. I'm John J.R. Robinson, and every week, music creation comes alive through stories, experiences, and sounds when vinyl records filled our hearts and minds. My friends and I share our tips and techniques used in creation of iconic tracks for recording artists such as Michael Jackson, Eric Clapton, Quincy Jones, and Steve Winwood, to name a few. Vinyl has emerged hot, and the soul of vinyl defines art and passion which burns deepest at night. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on intertalkradio.com.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Welcome back, folks. Today, my guest is Randy Layton. You guys know that I usually have musicians on the show, and they talk about their life and music and art before Christ and after Christ. Today is a little different, and I thought it to be very valid to have Randy on because, you know, you got all these Christian music bands, pretty much the time period like the 80s, late 70s, 80s, who are trying to get records out on small Christian labels and trying to get signed to major record labels to get more exposure, better money for recording, you know, all those things that come along with a major record contract that used to come along with a major record contract. Right. So Randy has my experience with Randy as a member of the 77s. Randy was very instrumental in breaking things for us, exposing our music to audiences everywhere, a lot. We used to go to Portland a lot and play. That was like, if not our favorite place to play, one of the favorite places to play because Randy got us on radio and
Eugene
got us in the newspaper. Yes. And so I want Randy in this last segment to tell us of his experiences working with Exit Records and the record labels that Exit was working with, trying to advance the career of the 77s. So you take it up there, Randy.
Okay. Well,
let's start off. Okay, so you hear the 77s. You like All Fall Down. You call the record. You call Exit Records.
Let me go back to that story. So,
okay,
what happens next is that Zan writes back and just writes this long. I still have the letter somewhere, but writes this long letter where he is just practically amazed, you know, that I seem to really get what they want to do, because he says. He's telling me at this time we're having people return the album in droves, you know, the bookstores. We're having songs banned by Christian radio, you know, something's holding on, I think, in particular. You know, so he just encouraged me to come down and talk more about what they were doing. And so I eventually did that. And, you know, through those visits, got to know the people that ran the label, in the church, and I got to know the various, artists on some level that were there, and that would include Steve Scott and, Peacock and those guys. So I was really, really infatuated with Steve Scott's music too, because again, he was somebody that I had already heard of even long before Exit as a writer and as a poet. And so when I understood that he was there working, and in fact, I think they'd already put out Love in the Western World, which I liked a lot. I got played for me these various things that were supposed to come out. There's an album he did called Emotional Tourist, which was ready for A&M to release, didn't get released. Eventually, I was asked, do you want to put it out? And I did, and that was sort of the start of the alternative label part of it. But I understood what Exit was trying to do. They were trying to be, they had money, they had a vision, but and they started off doing records that were only in the Christian market. That would have been the earliest ones by Vector and Thomas Goodlandis and guys like that. But they did have the vision for getting on the radio and getting on MTV, and because the music was as valid just on a musical level. There, the quality of what you had there was as valid as anything else that was out there. And so they initially, they already had word distribution, but they signed up with A&M. A&M also had a distribution deal with Word. From what, one of the parties that ran the label told me is that they believed to be a separate distribution deal from the Word deal, so that A&M would put into retail racks and on the radio the stuff by Exit and not have that associated with Amy Grant and Petra and whoever else Word was getting distribution through by A&M, so that one wouldn't go to the Christian section of a tower and find the Exit stuff shoved in there with them. They were supposed to be marketed separately. However, by that time, I was also running a retail record chain and was a buyer for them. And so I used to get catalogs from all the major companies, and I got the one from Word back when this rolled out, and all the Exit stuff was in the same area as a buyer, where I could also buy, what Amy was doing. They all had this WR prefix, and so I remember making a phone call and talking to that individual and saying, actually, I think it was just Jan that I told this to initially, and I said, here's your problem. I'm a record buyer, and I know who you guys are, but if I didn't know who you guys were, I would just look at this and go, oh, they're a Christian band because that's how it's being marketed, that's how it's being prefixed. They go into the Christian section. And that kind of sent many shockwaves back at the label, because that was not their intentionality in terms of the agreement. That was sort of the beginning of the end of that agreement. It was too bad, because I remember All Fall Down getting a lot of college airplay, which Aaron, you would recall, because especially overseas, you guys got video airplay on Pandora's Box and Holland and places like that, and yep. I remember Mercy being on MTV for 5 minutes and things like that. So there were, and there was a fair amount of airplay on CMJ. So you could see that it was possible, but from the retail end, and for me and my experiences, always came back to retail. It wasn't going to happen because, I might hear on the radio, but where am I going to find it? I'm going to find it at a bookstore. I'm not really going to find it at Tower, at least, outside of Tower, Sacramento, right? So that ended. Then, they courted other labels. Island, to take this very short, Island came along and agreed to distribute the Exit product. deals were both what we call, P&D deals. They were publishing and distribution deals. The only thing the Island had to do, or the A&M was required to do, was really just press up the records, or the tapes, and get initial copies out to radio, that sort of thing. But they were not required to have any kind of large advertising budget, required to give you a video budget. If it did give you those things, obviously you would have to pay it back, just like you would normally anyway. Mm-hmm. And they weren't required to make sure that records were being shipped to the major chains and what we call automatics, like RCA, Warner Brothers, whatever, would roll out a new artist, and if the chain was big enough, they would just send two copies of your record automatically, whether they ordered it or not. So, because they have that kind of power. But the stuff that we were putting out back then, none of that was going on. So, by the Island days, which initially was the Peacock album, the self-titled one, and then the one just called 77s, I was involved with Exit in terms of getting the record out to college radio and also Christian radio to make sure we hadn't forgotten them. And again, I remember you talked about breaking the sevens in this market. I mean, I was able to get that sevens record onto a station called KZL, which was at that point the number 2 AOR station in the state. They wound up going 4 cuts deep on the album, 3 of them heavy rotation. Can't Get Over It was number 1. And they had no idea that this was really a Christian band. I really sold it to them on the fact that this is a really good act. You should check it out. And they bought it on that basis. And it did so well in this market that Island kicked in money, and I kicked in money, and Exit kicked in money, and we brought the sevens to a place called the Law Hall, a quote-unquote secular venue, which sold out. And I'd say probably 80% of the people there had no idea that this was a Christian band. They just loved the music, and that's what they were there for. And there were girls screaming in the front row all night. I have the tapes. It sounds like the Beatles at Shea Stadium, It's very funny. And all that did so well, and so you could see what the possibilities were, that had the label had the interest, but not only that, had the impetus to have that kind of promotion available in various markets across the U.S., they could have broke the sevens in a big way. But that really only would have happened if they had been signed directly to Island, which they weren't. Yes, there was a little record called The Joshua Tree that came out that also took a lot of attention of Island, but that wasn't the sole reason why the record, eventually sank. That nationally even, Can't Get Over It had a lot of ads at AOR and also alternative. And I remember very well sitting in my office looking at these numbers and wondering why I can't get the record in the store. I was always getting backordered. And so I got hold of the head of Island Retail, who will remain nameless, and I said, look, this record is flying off the shelves here because I'm pushing it, and it's doing well at radio, but I can't bring it in from Island. You guys don't have it. And I'm hearing this complaint in different markets. And eventually that conversation wound up as, well, the 77s are a Christian band, and that's all they're ever going to be. And I went, okay, that's interesting. So I went back to the head person at the label and on the Exit side and said, I think you should hear what I just heard from the Island people. And a fairly limited response. They were not happy about that at all. So they touched base with, I think, Lou Malia was the head of Island at the time, but in the end, that was the pushback, and so that deal wound down pretty quickly right after the Robert Vaughn record. Robert Vaughn record is the same thing. Lots of ads for Justice. He was enough to where they got a gig on American Bandstand, but by the time the American Bandstand gig airs, radio is off the record, and retail never gets it. Because of these same issues. So that was the end of that whole thing, and then that started the process of everybody kind of looking for their own deals and getting out of that, because it became apparent that sort of scenario wasn't going to work. And I think what the individual acts found, like the 77s, was that, yes, they had initial interest from RCA and different labels, and everybody did showcases, and you were there, certainly, as part of them, and I was there. And in the end, people just passed, and I think partially because there was this thing kind of hanging over the group, like, yeah, but you're from, that Christian company, where you guys are Christians. Yeah. And I think that sank it.
Well,
so I think the acts had to make a quick decision. Do I just go to Nashville and become part of the Christian scene, which is what Chuck did?
Yeah.
Or do we just implode like the Sevens did and then eventually regroup? Or do I get out of music altogether, which a couple of the other acts did? So a lot of heartbreak during that period.
Yeah. Well, I want to take this time to publicly thank you, Randy, for all the things you did for the 77s. And I remember fondly playing in Portland to that crowd you mentioned. And I thank you for your struggle, man. And it was a pleasure talking to you today. And thank you, folks, for listening in.
Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al DiMeola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time, or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear from Eclectica Studios. I'm a full-time mixing and recording engineer. I work with Grammy winners, labels, and indie artists, using state-of-the-art digital mixing and restoration tools and the very best in analog gear. Really, though, it's my ability to bring tracks to life and fulfill your vision for your music. This has made me sought after by producers and artists worldwide. So spend your time working on music and not chasing a mix down a rabbit hole. Go to timdolbear.com and check out our free one-song mix offer.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.